Welcome to Faith Speaks here on Catholic Radio, WICX 102.7 FM here at Immaculate Heart of Mary Church, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back today. And I am very pleased with the show so far, and my guests have been wonderful and getting good reviews. And today I'm going to be speaking with Paul Brogan, and as you know, Paul has been on my other show Around Town on TV, but he's going to be talking today about his experiences with going to a Catholic school. And as you know, Concord had several Catholic elementary schools at one time. I can remember as a kid, was it Paul? Well, first off, welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Faith Speaks now.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here, Dick.
Yeah, and I know St. John's had an elementary school,
Yes.
because they got the middle school, they got the regular school now up to 8th grade.
Correct.
And I believe St. Peter's, Sacred Heart, Immaculate Conception maybe, I don't know.
I'm not sure in Pennacook whether they did. I remember that we had several students from Pennacook at St. Peter's,
Maybe that's
which
what
is
it
the
was.
location for
Yeah.
the Association for the Blind.
That's
now,
right, yes.
At 25 Walker Street.
That's
And that was 2 grades in each classroom, because we
Wow.
had 4 classrooms and it was grades 1 through 8.
Really?
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
And then there was also St. John's High School on Pleasant Street.
Yes.
Where I think there's an insurance company there now or something. It's a granite
Oh, really?
building
Oh,
there,
okay.
right before the Chamberlain House. It's that.
That's where the high school
That's where the
was?
high school was. Yes.
Really?
Yes, until 1963 when they built Bishop Brady.
Gosh, it didn't look like it was very big though.
It wasn't real large because it wasn't a regional high school. Bishop Brady is a regional. People from Franklin, Laconia area, from Suncook, and back then it was strictly from the Concord area, in particular from the St. John's Parish, but they also, St. Peter's, and some from Sacred Heart.
And of course, Immaculate Heart of Mary had, I believe, they had like a preschool to 2nd grade or maybe a 3rd grade here in this building.
In this building, yes.
And then all of a sudden, they all kind of closed, because I remember Sacred Heart had that building beside their church, that big, looked like a red building. Yes, that's the one right there, yes, by all means. Wow, that's an old picture.
Yes, yeah, that was an old postcard I found, but they did, and they had,
Yeah.
I don't remember what religious order taught there. I know that St. John's and St. Peter's had the Sisters of Mercy,
Okay.
who were out of Windham,
Okay.
New Hampshire, and they were a very dominant presence in the state of New Hampshire as far as the nuns. But it was a French order that taught at Sacred Heart, because they had half the day in French and half the day in English.
Really?
Yes. In the morning their classes were in French, and then in the afternoon in English.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know at St. John's High School, as you said, I had the high school on Pleasant Street. They had a very good marching band, because as I've said on the TV side there at times, we've got pictures of them, home pictures of them in the Christmas and Memorial Day parades.
Yes.
And they had their uniforms were in white, and I don't know if they were some green or not, but they definitely were white.
Yes.
So they had the majorettes and then of course the band, and they were very good.
They were very good. And I don't know why, when they opened Brady, they never continued that.
I don't know.
Because I don't know who taught, who was the band instructor or teacher at St. John's, but I went to Brady, and there was never any discussion even about having a band. And yet we had great sports teams, the Green Giants,
Yeah.
and it certainly would have lent itself to have had a band play at some of the games at Memorial Field.
Well, Paul Giles, the late Paul Giles, organized a marching band there one year, and they had green uniforms. And how I remember that is because they were using the Nevers band drum, the big bass drum, that carriage or that
Yes.
little trailer they put it on to march with it. And I knew that's who it was, and so. But then after 1 year, they were gone. Never saw them again. And they were good. It was a small band, but they did have everything from the drums to the trumpets, trombones, clarinets, and all that, flutes. So I mean, it was definitely a drum and not a drum and bugle, but it was a rhythm marching band.
I will investigate that because I'm still friends with Father Goodwin, who was a priest at St. Peter's, and he was a teacher and later the administrator at Brady. And he lives in Manchester now, but he has a sharp memory because he remembers things I did in a class decades ago. So I will ask him about that, why it was that way, because that's an interesting topic.
And for many years, Catholic schools were quite very popular. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, they closed them all, except the high school and St. John's School. And, it just seems sad. But then all of a sudden, I remember that even Bishop Brady was in problems there.
Yes.
Financially, and they came very close to closing.
Yes.
And, but then I think Dr. John Argue of Pittsfield got involved and started a big fundraising campaign up there, and it really worked.
It did.
And all of a sudden, Bishop Brady came back bigger than ever, and today they are very much on solid footing.
They are.
And like you said, they're getting students from all over.
And they've expanded. They, almost doubled the size of the actual, campus area. I think in the case of St. Peter's, since I was a parishioner at St. Peter's, I think a lot of the decision to close the school was financial, because when they no longer had the nuns to teach, because people were not going in, answering a vocation, you had to pay lay teachers the going rate. And suddenly, the nuns only accepted a small stipend because the parish took care of their living and other expenses. And suddenly you had to pay a lay teacher thousands of dollars a year. And that would have meant raising the tuition. And I think a lot of parents, were not willing to pay. The parish paid like 75%. And then the parents were responsible for the balance. But once you had to raise the tuition to cover having non-religious, then I think it became too much for both the parish and for parents to do. And I think that's when they started to pull back. But it was a great education. I know that you were in public schools, but I always say to people, sometimes you learned out of fear because the yardstick or something else, because you could do corporal punishment in, a parochial school, because you could also expel somebody, whereas in public schools, you could do it for a period of time, but you couldn't say you're out, goodbye. But you learned still, and eventually you came to respect that whole process.
I remember a couple of friends of mine, well actually they were family friends, but their children were in dame school with us. In fact, one of them was born the same day I was. His name was Tommy Brackett. And they lived out on Old Loudon Road, right next to the stove barn now.
Used to be the Lone Star Dairy Bar,
yes. And they lived in that house there. And after second grade, Tommy and his sister Sheila went to St. John's. And I don't know why, what happened, but I do remember them saying they felt that their mother did it, they got a better education there. What would be a typical day at a parochial school? Now, the bell rings and we go into your classroom.
Yes.
What happens? Do they start with the national anthem or the Star Spangled, the Pledge of Allegiance? Do they do a prayer? What happens?
We would always do the Pledge of Allegiance, but we always began with a prayer before the Pledge of Allegiance. That was always, and later on when non-Catholics began to go, they were given the opportunity. They could remain in their seat or something. They didn't have to. They weren't forced to participate in that portion. But you did the prayer and then the Pledge of Allegiance. And then because at St. Peter's there were 2 grades, it was up to Sister to go back and forth. We had 60 people in a classroom, usually about 30 to each grade, huge rooms. And so she would give one side, say the third grade, some busy work to do. You need to read chapter such and such. And then she would go over to the other side and work with them for a while, then return and back and forth. But you had, religion each day, but it wasn't much more than probably 15 or 20 minutes. The Baltimore Catechism, which was, the sort of the primer that told you what you needed to know and how, it told you about the sacraments and indulgences and sanctifying grace, etc. And then the rest of the day was structured exactly as it would be in the public school. I mean, you had geography, you had arithmetic, you had English, diagramming sentences and doing, all of those things. And everything else was, there was a recess, there was lunchtime, and we went to school a little longer. We went to school till 3:15. At that time, the public schools were usually out about 2:45 or so.
Yeah.
And we started at 8:15. So I think the day may have been a little bit longer. And the only difference in the school year was you got off holy days. Was a day in which you didn't have classes. Beyond, and because they were not specifically tied to the 180 days a year, at that time at least, that the public school system enforced. So you had probably during the course of the year 3 or 4 days, All Saints Day, if they happened during the school year, Feast of the Annunciation and things like that, that would be a day off. But you were expected to go to church on those days.
Now, you said they had non-Catholic students at these schools as well?
Not very many. Not as much in elementary as when I went to Brady.
Oh, okay.
Because the notion was that the structure of the parochial schools, well, for one thing, because you wore uniforms, you didn't have that whole competitive thing, judging somebody because, well, she wears the best clothes and she can't afford them, and so this way everyone looked alike, so you didn't have that dynamic impacting. But there were some non-Catholics that did go to Brady because their parents felt that it was a good background and the whole structure of it. And I think you probably, at the time at least, had a better opportunity of selecting the college you could go to because you had been in parochial school. At that time, colleges looked at you were probably a better candidate because you may have been a better student.
Interesting. Now, did you close the school day with a prayer again?
Yes, we did.
You did?
Yes.
And what about catechism? Was that also a part of the day, or did you have to stay afterwards?
No. The only people that had to go off of school hours were Catholic children who went to public schools.
Oh, okay.
And they had Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, CCD classes. And those were held on Sunday after the 8:15 Mass in the school.
Oh, okay.
So those were held about 9:30 to 10:30.
Oh, yeah.
We had 15 to 20 minutes each day of the Baltimore Catechism, and that was it. So it amounted to probably an hour to an hour and 20 minutes a week.
Why do you refer to, I see it here too, the Baltimore Catechism? Why Baltimore?
This was the catechism that had been developed by a Bishop McGuire or Father McGuire in, I think, the early 1920s. This had been created to help students to, you had to memorize, section, who is God? God is the supreme being who made all things. And you had all of these particular questions and answers that would then be discussed in class. But it was out of Baltimore, Maryland was where it was published. And it became, for the entire Catholic school population in this country, the definitive book for probably about 40 years that every school, had. And it took you through the whole eight grades before you went to high school, sections of it. It was that thick. You had, the sections that you learned. And then in 5th grade, they might suddenly, to see if you remembered, go back to a question that you learned in 1st or 2nd grade to see if you had retained that. So you really needed to concentrate, which was also one of the great things about having a classroom with 2 grades. You had to focus on what you were doing while sister is over here teaching the other grade. And so you had to learn concentration and how to not be distracted by, everything else that was going on. So in those ways, I think it was a very good education that was very, very, it really gave you some good tools to use later on in life.
Did they teach you I'm trying to think, not the Latin? Did they teach you Latin at all?
We learned a little bit of Latin with respect to, because the Mass was still in Latin
yes,
then. And so you needed Dominus Vobiscum, Ectum Spiritu Tuo, and many of the songs we sang, like O Sanctissima or Panis Angelicus, you learned and you knew what it meant. They taught you what, but as far as actually learning extensive Latin, no, pretty much just within the framework of how it would impact on your understanding of the Mass and everything. And in the Catholic schools, they also taught you writing in 2nd grade. In public schools, they started it in 3rd grade, but in the Catholic schools, it was always in 2nd grade, the Palmer method and that whole,
Really?
you can still tell if somebody, I will sign my name sometimes and somebody will say, oh my God, you went to Catholic school, that flowing kind of, we all wrote alike, but.
Oh. And then, of course, you had a lunch period. Did you have? But I'm trying to picture, like say St. John's High School. And it couldn't have been much land there.
No, I don't think there was. I was only inside it once, but no, I don't think it didn't have. I don't think they had the ability to move from classroom to classroom for every subject like Brady, was able to do.
Yeah.
I think it was probably still a lot more confined to having 2 or 3 different subjects in one classroom because you didn't have that ability to move
I
around.
know as I'm driving up Pleasant Street in my mind, I'm trying to picture. I know that building, but it doesn't look like it. How could it be
No.
a school? They must have either remodeled it after the school closed. But
They tore the building down.
Oh, they did?
Oh, they totally tore the
Oh,
building
okay.
down.
All right.
They tore the building down in 1963.
Oh, okay.
So, and then put up that granite.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, yes, and there wasn't really much of a parking lot or anything either, because then most people walked to school. I mean, you didn't have everybody, bringing their car. And one of the big differences between us and the public school, if you did well on a book report or you excelled in something, you were given a holy card, much like, that was your reward, was acknowledged. Instead of gold star or silver star or something else, you got a holy card. And that was a significant way of saying you did a really good job. Or a scapular you got.
yes,
So there were, that in that respect, it was different than it would have been in the public schools. But those were the things you strive for, and you certainly strived to get the satisfaction. You wanted to know the nuns approved. And when our report cards were given out, usually the pastor from the church came in and gave out the report cards.
Oh, really?
He stood up there and he looked at it and then he said, oh, Paul Brogan, you've done pretty well this time in front of the whole class, which, made you sort of feel, what if I didn't do well?
Oh, I know, I can well imagine.
He would say, well, conduct, you got a B-. I think you could improve yourself in that area, and I'd like to see that go up. But that was the importance they placed on the distribution of report cards, was having the pastor come and do that.
Interesting, because I was just wondering about that. But so when they closed St. John's High School,
Yes.
and then was Brady ready to open up?
Immediately. St. John's closed in June, the class graduated, and then Brady opened that September.
Why did they name it Bishop Brady? Why didn't they just say continue with the St. John's name?
Because they didn't want it to seem like it was just St. John's. Matthew Brady had been a bishop that had been very, very strong for Catholic education in the state of New Hampshire. He had been, before Bishop Primo, I believe, was when there had been a Bishop Bradley, which they named the school in Nashua after, and then later there was a Bishop Brady. And so I think because of his commitment to educating Catholic youth, they decided to name it. Plus, that was more encompassing, so nobody could say, well, I don't go to St. John's Parish, so I don't really want to go to St. John's High School, or so by naming it Bishop Brady, it took away some of that. And that was when they started to encourage. We had a bus of students that came down from Laconia and Tilton. We had a bus that picked students up from St. Jean the Baptist Church in Suncook, Allenstown, Pembroke. Well,
Suncook,
there's so many names. And so that was part of what they were trying to make it more of a regional high school.
Okay. But you mentioned Bishop Bradley. I remember Bishop Bradley High School in Manchester as a kid, and it was Manchester. And then they changed it to become Trinity. And I wondered then, why did they change that name?
I don't know.
Nashua's got Bishop Girton now.
That's right.
But I don't know when that started either. But then we got St. Thomas Aquinas in the
Dover
area. And I don't know what other Catholic, I know there must be others in the state.
Yes, there used to be one, I think, in Berlin, but it may not be there anymore.
Yeah,
I don't
Notre
know.
Dame High School.
Okay.
Notre Dame.
All right.
But yeah, you're right. I don't think it's going now.
No, because
I never
Berlin's
hear it.
fallen on some really rough times. And I think Keene had a Catholic
I think so
high
too.
school, but I don't remember what it was called either.
No.
And they had a huge parochial school, but I don't know whether that's open anymore or not. But I went to Runlet for 7th and 8th, and the difference I felt, my grades plummeted to D's. I had to, in fact, repeat one course in the summertime, and yet once I went back to Brady, my grades went up to A's and B pluses. So we were still doing it they hadn't gone to the 90s and all of those things yet. But I think some people just work better in that kind of a environment. And I think, again, the uniform thing, I think cuts down on some of the cliques and some of the, well, I'm better than you because I have designer clothes and you have, something from the thrift shop or the second hand. And, people can be cruel, as we know. And I think by eliminating that, you're making everybody on the same playing field. And I think also at Brady, gym class wasn't compulsory. So the kids that weren't really at their best doing that weren't forced to go in and be made to look foolish or ridiculous. And you could do what you were good at, whether it was debate club or something else. So. But
and it's funny because it's not really funny, but it's interesting to note that for a while that wasn't the private or the parochial schools were really almost on the brink of elimination.
Yes.
And now look at them. Plus the Christian schools have all opened up.
Yes.
And it's amazing how many kids or how many families are opting to go to those schools.
Yes.
I mean, St. John's has a waiting list, I believe, to get into the middle school down there, or the elementary middle school. Brady, though, I think the tuition up there is very expensive.
It's very expensive now, yes, yes.
And one might think that even St. Paul's over there on Pleasant Street up there past the hospital, That's not really Catholic though, that's
No.
Anglican and Episcopalian, I guess.
Yes.
But the tuition there is a private
Is
school.
very steep, very, very steep.
So boy,
yes.
I tell you, I mean, I know for a while Bishop Brady was running the weekly bingo games up there, and they were doing very well with it, to help with money for the to maintain the school and to make the improvements they needed, and they had the gymnasium was full of people, and then the cafeteria was where the non-smokers sat.
Yes, yes.
And you'd have to get there sometimes Saturday morning at 8 o'clock to get a seat, and then to go back in the afternoon to sit there and play bingo. But
Wow.
at nighttime, but that was the big thing that kept Bishop Brady going. So it's just interesting that as we sit here and see how the changes in Catholic education have come,
Very true.
you know, and how
Very
it's
true.
now very popular, and you know, we've got colleges now, of course, the big famous one, Notre Dame.
Notre
and,
Dame.
You know, and of course out there in Warner is
Yes.
Magdalene, but they've changed the name of that now. and
Yes.
I can't remember what it is.
I don't remember either, but
I heard, in fact, I heard it just the other day, but it's, you know, that's still going. It's small, but it's going. So people are opting for something different. So.
which is good. And again, I can't say enough good things about the education and what they instill in you.
Sure.
And it was a perfect balance. I mean, you didn't feel like you were having your religion shoved down your throat or
No.
anything. The majority of the day was just as though you were in any other school. But there was that component. There was a crucifix in every classroom. There was a picture of Mother Macaulay, who was the founder of the Sisters of Mercy, in each of the classrooms where Sisters of Mercy taught. And and the missionaries came periodically, and so did the brothers and priests, to try to encourage us to find our vocation,
Sure.
if we had one.
Sure.
So it was, but beyond that, it was school,
Yeah.
and it was.
Well, good. Well, we're going to come to a close of Faith Speaks here in Concord, and I'm very happy that Paul Brogan has visited with us today and talking about his experiences with the Catholic schools. And if you have any questions, if you've got children, you might give St. John's a call and see if you can go visit there, and even Bishop Brady as they go through the higher schools. But with that in mind, thanks for joining us on WICX Catholic Radio 102.7 FM. And I'm Dick Patten, your host. Thank you, Paul, for coming in.
Thank you.
And wishing you all a very Merry Christmas. Take care now.